They laughed at her the moment she stepped off the bus. Too quiet, too fragile, too old for boot camp, they said. No one knew who she was. No one knew what she'd been through, and no one expected that the woman they mocked would carry a scar that would silence an entire base. Cut to slow-motion scenes, dusty training field, soldiers running, Sarah struggling but not giving up. A world that worships strength. She showed them something far greater, the power of kindness, the courage of compassion, and the strength of a heart that refused to quit. The first day of boot camp was supposed to be tough, but not cruel. Yet, as soon as Private Sarah Miller stepped off the bus, the laughter began. She was smaller than the rest. Her uniform looked one size too big, and when she dropped her duffel bag, the group of recruits snickered. "Careful, Grandma," one of them said. Sarah didn't answer. She simply picked up the bag again, eyes steady, jaw tight. No one knew much about her, just that she'd enlisted at 29, older than most recruits. Too old, some whispered. Too soft, others said. But every morning, while the others groaned through drills, Sarah was already up before dawn, running laps in the fog, silent, determined. And when the group pushed through obstacle courses, she was always the last to finish, but never quit. That's what started to bother them. She didn't fight back. She didn't shout. She didn't defend herself. She just kept going. One blistering afternoon during endurance training, the commander, Captain Harris, barked, "Pair up. You'll be running with weighted packs, 5 miles. Nobody wanted Sarah. She ended up alone, carrying her full gear and an extra pack left by a recruit faking a sprained ankle. By mile 2, the sun was brutal. Her boots sank in the dust. Sweat ran into her eyes. She stumbled, but didn't stop. Captain Harris watched from his jeep, arms crossed. "She's not going to make it," he muttered to his sergeant. But Sarah did make it. Barely. She crossed the finish line, face pale, lips trembling. The others laughed again when she vomited near the fence. That night, while everyone joked in the barracks, Sarah sat alone cleaning her boots, humming quietly to herself, a tune that sounded like a lullaby. Days passed. Then came combat simulation week, the toughest test yet. Sarah was assigned to a squad led by Corporal Diaz, one of the loudest mockers. "Just stay out of the way, Grandma," he said, loading his rifle. "We'll handle the action." But halfway through the drill, their unit came under simulated fire. Smoke grenades filled the air. Someone panicked. Diaz tripped, twisting his ankle. The others scattered, confused. Sarah didn't. She dropped her pack, crawled through the dirt, and dragged Diaz behind cover. Bullets blanks snapping overhead. "Why'd you come back?" He gasped. She just said, "Because you would have done the same." But the truth was, he wouldn't have. That evening, Captain Harris called Sarah into his office. He looked at her file, frowning. "Private Miller, you're consistent, I'll give you that. But physically, you're struggling. You might not make it through final evaluation." She nodded. "I understand, sir." Then as she turned to leave, he noticed something. A long, faded scar running from her shoulder down her back, just visible through her undershirt. He froze. "Wait, that scar, where did you get it?" Sarah hesitated, her voice softened. "Fallujah. 2010. Harris blinked. "That's—" "Yes, sir," she said quietly. "Army medic. Lost my team in an ambush. Took shrapnel trying to pull out a wounded boy. Was medically discharged 2 years later." Harris stood there, speechless. He suddenly remembered the incident, the reports, the unnamed medic who saved 3 soldiers while wounded herself. He swallowed hard. Why come back now?" Sarah smiled faintly. "Because kindness doesn't retire, sir. I wanted to train the next generation, to remind them that strength isn't how loud you shout. It's how quietly you stand when no one believes in you." The next morning, when the platoon assembled for inspection, something was different. No one laughed. No one whispered. Captain Harris stepped forward. "Recruits," he said, "you've all judged Private Miller by what you saw, but what you didn't see was who she is." Then, turning to Sarah, he saluted, a rare gesture from a commanding officer. "For courage beyond measure," he said quietly, "and a heart this unit would be lucky to have." The recruit stood in silence. Then Diaz, the one she'd saved, stepped out and saluted too. One by one, the others followed. For the first time, Sarah's eyes glistened. A month later, Sarah completed boot camp. She didn't finish first, she didn't win awards, but when she marched at graduation, the entire base stood to applaud. Captain Harris watched from the stage, hand over his heart. He leaned toward his sergeant and whispered, Never judge a soldier or a person by the weight they carry. Some carry battles you'll never see. True strength isn't loud, it's gentle, patient, and kind. And sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who's already fought the hardest battles. Absolutely. Here's the continuation of the story they mocked her at boot camp. Then the commander went pale at her hidden scar, written in the same emotional, cinematic, and inspirational tone. This section continues right after Sarah graduates boot camp. Part 2, the medal she never wanted. The ceremony had ended hours ago, but Sarah Miller still stood alone on the training field. The night air was cool, the stars sharp and endless above her. She closed her eyes and listened, the distant hum of crickets, the echo of marching boots fading into memory. For the first time in years she felt peace, not because she'd proven anyone wrong, but because she'd found what she'd lost, the belief that kindness and courage could still coexist in a world hardened by survival. She touched the scar on her shoulder. It no longer felt like a wound, it felt like a map, each line a story of someone she'd saved or someone she'd lost. A voice called out from behind her, "Private Miller." She turned to see Captain Harris walking toward her, holding something small in his hand. "I thought you might want this," he said. It was a medal, the same kind she'd refused years ago when she left the Army hospital. "I don't need medals, sir," she said softly. "I know," he replied, smiling. "That's why you deserve it." He pinned it gently to her uniform. "You reminded this place what leadership really means, not command, compassion." Sarah blinked back tears. "Thank you, sir." Harris nodded once, then turned to leave. But before he did, he said something that stayed with her forever. "Heroes don't always wear new scars, Miller. Sometimes they carry old ones so others don't have to." Months later, Sarah received an unexpected letter. It was from Corporal Diaz, now deployed overseas. He wrote, "I used to think strength was about shouting the loudest or running the fastest, but the day you came back for me in that smoke, I saw what real strength looks like. You didn't save me because I deserved it. You saved me because you believed in something bigger. I try to remember that every day now. Thank you for showing me what it means to be human." Sarah folded the letter carefully and tucked it inside her journal, next to a pressed photo of her old medic unit. She whispered to the quiet night, "Maybe that's what it's all about, reminding each other we're still capable of good." Epilogue, the instructor. 2 years later, the recruits at Fort Hope whispered about a new instructor. Rumor said she was strict but fair, tough but kind, and that she had a long scar on her shoulder that no one dared to ask about. When one of the younger cadets complained that she was too soft for a soldier, an older officer simply smiled and said, "Careful, son. That soft soldier once carried more courage in one heartbeat than most of us do in a lifetime." Every morning before dawn, Instructor Miller still ran laps in the fog. And when she passed the engraved memorial near the gate, the one honoring fallen medics, she always stopped for a moment, not to mourn, but to promise, to keep being kind, to keep being strong, to keep teaching others that one quiet act of humanity can echo farther than any battle cry. In a world that often mistakes silence for weakness, remember this: the kindest hearts are often the bravest souls. Absolutely. Here's the next continuation, part 3 of the story they mocked her at boot camp. Then the commander went pale at her hidden scar. This part follows instructor Sarah Miller, now a respected mentor at Fort Hope, as she faces a new challenge that tests everything she stands for: compassion, courage, and second chances. Part 3. The broken recruit. The early morning mist clung to the training field as instructor Sarah Miller blew her whistle. "Fall in, recruits," she shouted. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried the kind of authority that made people listen. A line of nervous faces stared back at her. Among them was one that caught her attention. A young man standing at the edge of the formation, shoulders slumped, eyes distant. His name was Evan Turner, barely 19. He didn't speak much, and when he did, it was usually an apology. Sarah watched as he struggled through the obstacle course. He tripped, fell, got up, fell again. The others laughed quietly, just as they once had at her. But she didn't shout at him. Instead, she walked over, knelt beside him, and said softly, "Get up, Turner. You don't fail when you fall. You fail when you stay down." He looked up at her, breathing hard. "Ma'am, I don't belong here." Sarah's eyes softened. "Neither did I," she said. Until I proved myself wrong over the next few weeks, Evan's progress was slow but steady. Sarah noticed things others didn't. The way his hands shook when he heard loud noises, how he stared at the ground whenever someone raised their voice. She'd seen that look before. the same haunted, fragile expression she'd worn years ago after losing her unit. One evening, after training, she found him sitting alone on the bleachers, staring at the sunset. "You're not the first to carry ghosts here," she said gently. He didn't answer. Finally, he whispered, "My dad was a Marine, died last year. I thought if I joined, maybe I could make him proud, but I'm just not like him." Sarah sat beside him. "You're not supposed to be him, Evan. You're supposed to be you, and that's enough." He looked at her, eyes wet. "How do you do it? How do you stay strong?" She smiled faintly. "By remembering that strength isn't about not breaking, it's about choosing to heal every single day." The next week, the recruits had their first live field exercise. It was tough. Long miles, harsh weather, minimal rest. During the night march, a sudden thunderstorm rolled in. The terrain turned slick and dangerous. Sarah was checking the line when she heard someone yell. Turner had slipped down a slope and twisted his ankle. "Stay put," she shouted, sliding down to him. Rain poured in sheets, the ground turning to mud. "Ma'am, leave me," he gasped. "I'll slow everyone down." But Sarah gritted her teeth. Not happening. She hoisted him up, supporting his weight, and began the long, grueling climb back up. By the time they reached the ridge, both were soaked, trembling, and exhausted. The recruits watched in awe as their instructor carried a man twice her size through the storm. Later, in the infirmary, Evan said quietly, "Why'd you do it?" Sarah smiled. "Because someone once did the same for me." That night, Captain Harris visited the ward. He looked at her with quiet pride. "Still saving people, huh?" Sarah chuckled. "Old habits die hard." He nodded. "You've turned this camp into something different, Miller. Less fear, more heart. That's leadership." Weeks later, when the recruits graduated, Evan stood at attention, medal shining on his chest. Before leaving, he walked up to Sarah and handed her something small, an old, worn photograph of his father. "I think he'd be proud," Sarah said softly. Evan smiled. "You taught me he would. Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself." She nodded, touched. As he walked away, Sarah looked at the photo in her hand, then up at the bright morning sky. Somewhere deep inside, she felt peace again, stronger this time, steady and calm. Because she finally understood, the greatest soldiers aren't the ones who never fall. They're the ones who lift others back up. When you choose kindness in a world that teaches hardness, you don't just change others, you heal yourself too. Of course, here's the next continuation, part 4 of your story. They mocked her at boot camp. Then the commander went pale at her hidden scar. This part takes place a few years later, when Sarah's quiet legacy begins to ripple far beyond the walls of Fort Hope. Part 4. The speech that changed everything. The auditorium was silent. Rows of young cadets sat upright, their uniforms crisp, their faces eager. At the front stood instructor Sarah Miller, now in her mid-30s, her posture calm but strong. She'd been invited to speak at the National Military Academy, an honor usually reserved for high-ranking officers, not instructors. The announcement had surprised her. The speech she was about to give would be streamed live across the country. As she waited for her cue, she ran her fingers lightly across the small medal pinned near her heart, the one Captain Harris had once given her. When the lights dimmed and the stage microphone flickered on, she took a deep breath and began. "Good evening," she said. Her voice was gentle, but it carried a quiet power. "Most of you joined to prove something. To your families, to your country, maybe to yourself. I did too." She paused, scanning the room. "I came to boot camp hoping to find strength. Instead, I found pain, humiliation, and doubt. People laughed at me, mocked me, said I didn't belong. But the truth is, they were half right." A ripple of confusion crossed the crowd. "I didn't belong, not in their idea of strength. I belonged in a new kind, the kind that doesn't shout orders or flex muscles, the kind that picks up someone who's fallen, carries them through a storm, and never asks for thanks." She looked down for a moment, then slowly rolled up her sleeve, revealing the faint, jagged scar running along her shoulder. The audience leaned forward. "This," she said quietly, "is my reminder. Not of pain, but of purpose." Her voice softened. "I earned it in a place where kindness felt like weakness, and saving lives felt like failure. But this scar taught me something I want all of you to remember. The body heals when the battle ends. The heart heals when you choose compassion." For a long moment, no one moved. Even the camera stayed perfectly still. She continued, voice trembling just slightly. Years ago, a commander told me something I'll never forget. He said, "Heroes don't always wear new scars. Sometimes they carry old ones so others don't have to." She smiled faintly. Now I tell my recruits the same thing, because every act of kindness, every moment you choose humanity over pride, leaves a mark too. Not a scar you can see, but one the world can feel. Then she took a step back and concluded, "So if anyone ever tells you kindness makes you weak, smile and show them what strength really looks like." The silence that followed was deafening. Then one cadet began to clap, then another. Within seconds, the entire hall was on its feet. Applause thundered through the building, echoing off the walls. Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she stepped off the stage. Captain Harris, now retired but sitting in the front row, rose slowly and saluted her. She returned the salute, her hand trembling slightly. Epilogue. The Ripple that night, a clip of Sarah's speech was uploaded online. Within days, it spread across social media, shared by veterans, soldiers, nurses, teachers, and strangers around the world. Her words, "Kindness doesn't make you weak, it makes you unstoppable," became a quote printed on posters and engraved on academy walls. Letters poured in from people she'd never met, a mother from Texas, a nurse from London, a firefighter from Toronto, all thanking her for reminding them that compassion, not cruelty, is what holds humanity together. And years later, when Sarah stood once more on that same parade ground, watching a new class of recruits march past, she smiled. Not because they were perfect, but because they cared. Captain Harris's voice echoed in her mind once more. Never judge a soldier or a person by the weight they carry. Some carry battles you'll never see. Sarah closed her eyes, whispering to the wind, and some carry hope. One act of kindness can outlive a lifetime of battles, because courage may win wars, but compassion wins hearts. Absolutely. Here's the next continuation, part 5 of your ongoing story. They mocked her at boot camp. Then the commander went pale at her hidden scar. This part shows how Sarah's message of compassion begins to inspire the world, and how her past quietly transforms into a movement of hope. Part 5. The Quiet Strength Project. It had been 6 months since Sarah Miller's speech shook the academy. She never expected what came next. Her inbox was full, hundreds of emails, messages, and letters. Some came from soldiers, others from teachers, nurses, even teenagers who had watched her speech online. One line kept appearing again and again. "You made me believe kindness still matters." Sarah read every message. Some made her smile. Others made her cry. But one email stopped her cold. It was from a young journalist named Emily Carter, a 25-year-old writer from Toronto. The message: "Dear Instructor Miller, I watched your speech the night I was about to give up on journalism. My editor told me stories about hope don't sell, but after hearing your words I realized hope isn't something you sell, it's something you share. I want to write your story not as a military piece but as a story about humanity. Would you let me?" Sarah hesitated. She had never liked the spotlight, but something about Emily's message felt sincere, real. After a few days, she agreed. The interview Emily arrived at Fort Hope one rainy afternoon. She expected a hardened soldier, someone with a commanding presence. Instead, she found a woman who greeted her with warm tea, a calm smile, and gentle eyes that had clearly seen both heaven and hell. As the recorder clicked on, Emily asked, "Why did you really come back, Instructor Miller? After all that pain, why return to this life?" Sarah looked out the window for a long time before answering. "Because somewhere out there," she said quietly, "is a young soldier who thinks kindness makes them weak. I came back to show them it doesn't." Emily asked about the scar, the one the world now knew from her speech. Sarah smiled softly. "It used to remind me of what I lost. Now it reminds me of what I still have, the ability to heal others." The article a month later, Emily's article, was published. The title read, "The Quiet Strength of Sarah Miller, the Soldier Who Fought with Kindness." It went viral overnight. News outlets picked it up, schools shared it in assemblies, and veterans organizations reached out to collaborate. Soon, Sarah began receiving invitations to speak, not just at military events, but at hospitals, schools, and shelters. She called her growing outreach effort the Quiet Strength Project. Its mission was simple: to teach that empathy, courage, and kindness are not signs of weakness, but the foundation of real strength. The movement. Within a year, the Quiet Strength Project spread to 5 countries. Volunteers led workshops for wounded veterans, youth groups, and first responders dealing with trauma. Sarah didn't care about fame. She cared about the stories, the lives quietly changing because someone chose compassion instead of cruelty. She often told her team, never underestimate what one gentle act can do. The ripple always reaches farther than you can see. A letter from Captain Harris one morning. Sarah received a small handwritten envelope. It was from Captain Harris, now fully retired. "Miller, I watched your project grow. You've turned pain into purpose, and I couldn't be prouder. You once said kindness doesn't retire. You were right. I see it every time your message reaches another heart. Keep going. The world needs more soldiers like you." Sarah smiled, tears blurring her vision. She placed the letter beside her medal, the two things she valued most. Epilogue. The next generation. Years later, Sarah stood on a stage again, but this time the faces before her weren't soldiers. They were children, hundreds of them, holding small cards that read, "Kindness is my strength." As she looked out at them, her heart swelled. She thought of the mocking voices from years ago, the scar, the pain, the long road that led here. And she whispered, almost to herself, "They mocked me once for being soft. But maybe softness was the strongest thing I ever had." The audience rose in applause, not for a soldier, not for a hero, but for a woman who turned her scars into symbols of hope. The strongest people aren't the ones who never break. They're the ones who choose to heal others, even while they're still healing themselves. Of course, here's the next continuation, part 6 of your story. They mocked her at Bootcamp. Then the commander went pale at her hidden scar. This chapter takes place a few years after the Quiet Strength Project becomes a global movement, and shows how Sarah faces her greatest challenge yet, staying true to her message when the world begins to lose faith in kindness. Part 6. When the world stopped believing it started with the headlines. Global conflict erupts in the East, communities divided by fear and blame. Everywhere Sarah looked, the world she had spent years trying to heal seemed to be tearing itself apart again. The Quiet Strength Project, her creation, her purpose, was struggling. Donations were dropping, volunteers were leaving, and some people mocked the idea that kindness could make any difference in such a cruel time. For the first time in years, Sarah felt powerless. She sat alone in her office, staring at a photo on the wall. Her and Captain Harris the day the project launched. The words he'd once said echoed in her mind, "Kindness doesn't retire." But now, it felt like kindness was being forgotten. The breaking point one evening, Sarah was invited to a live TV debate. The host introduced her as the woman who believes kindness can fix the world. The other guest was a decorated general named Colonel Briggs, a man known for his blunt realism. The discussion turned heated fast. "Ms. Miller," Briggs said sharply, "you talk about compassion like it's a weapon, but it doesn't stop bullets. It doesn't end wars." Sarah looked at him calmly. "You're right, Colonel. Kindness doesn't stop bullets, but it stops people from firing them." He smirked. "That's a nice quote, but the world doesn't run on feelings." "No," Sarah said quietly. "It runs on people, and people run on hope. Take that away, and all that's left is fear, and fear builds walls, not bridges." The audience went silent. Even Briggs hesitated. The letter that changed everything that night. After the broadcast, Sarah returned home feeling drained. She opened her email, thousands of messages again, some supportive, some cruel. Then she noticed one message marked urgent. It was from an old recruit, Evan Turner, now serving overseas as a medic. "Instructor Miller, things are hard out here. Everyone's losing patience and fear is turning friends into enemies. But I remembered your words, kindness isn't weakness, it's courage that heals. Yesterday, I saved a wounded civilian who was supposed to be our enemy. My team didn't understand at first, but then, they helped me. You were right, ma'am. Compassion spreads faster than hate, if someone's brave enough to start it." Sarah stared at the message for a long time, tears glistening in her eyes. And just like that, her purpose reignited. Rekindling the flame the next morning, Sarah called an emergency meeting with her team. Her voice was steady again. "We started the Quiet Strength Project to remind the world that kindness matters," she said. "And now's the time to prove it, not with words, but with action." They began organizing kindness missions, volunteers helping civilians in war zones, offering aid, education, and comfort. Photos of soldiers helping wounded children and nurses comforting strangers began flooding the internet. The movement sparked again, stronger this time, because it wasn't just about Sarah anymore. It was about everyone who had ever believed in the quiet power of good. A visit to the memorial. Weeks later, Sarah visited the memorial at Fort Hope, the same place where her journey began. Names were etched in stone, memories carved into silence. She placed a single white rose at the base and whispered, "I kept the promise." Behind her, a small group of recruits, new faces, stood watching. One of them asked, "Ma'am, is it true they once mocked you here?" Sarah smiled softly. "Yes, and I thank them for it, because if they hadn't, I might never have learned what strength really means." Epilogue: The Legacy. Years later, a statue stood outside the National Military Academy. It wasn't of a soldier with a gun, but of a woman kneeling, helping another to their feet. At the base, a single inscription read, "True strength is quiet. True courage is kind." Sarah Miller's students, soldiers and strangers, came from around the world to see it. Some came to honor her service. Others came to remember her message. But everyone left with one thought in their heart, that maybe, just maybe, the world still had a chance, as long as there were people brave enough to be kind,